Hello, Muslim friends in the world. The sky over Oakland, California was dark that day, as if mourning the loss of a man who had once been the protector of a little girl named Amber. She was only 8 years old when her world suddenly went silent. Her father, the only person she had ever truly trusted, was gone forever. At the funeral, Amber clutched her old stuffed toy tightly. Her eyes stared at the cold headstone, yet her mind still hoped this was just a dream. But it wasn't. The reality hit harder than any punch she would later take in an MMA ring. After her father's death, Amber's life changed drastically. She didn't just lose a father, she lost direction. Her mother, once able to smile when her husband was around, had become a stranger. Addicted to alcohol and drugs, she slowly faded from reality and from Amber's life. Amber grew up in a house filled with screaming, broken dishes, and the stench of alcohol. Every night felt like war, not with monsters under the bed, but with her own mother. She often fell asleep on a pillow soaked with tears, clutching fear, cold, and a loneliness she couldn't describe. Violence became Amber's only form of escape, not as a victim, but as a form of defense. She learned to punch, to kick, to yell, not because she wanted to fight, but because the world had taught her that weakness wasn't an option. MMA came into her life as an outlet and eventually became her identity. In the ring, Amber became someone else. Not the abandoned little girl, not the victim, but a fighter. Sweat and blood became her language. The roar of the crowd, the voice of her coach, and the pain in her body were easier to bear than the wounds that silently bled inside her soul. But no matter how strong her body became, Amber knew something inside her was missing. Something that couldn't be filled by championship belts or the spotlight. Every time she went home, the emptiness would return like a haunting ghost. She often stared up at the night sky, whispering, "Is this really the life I was meant to live?" But the answer never came. Not yet. The heat in the gym made the air thick, the scent of sweat mingling with dust in the air. Amber spent her days here, hitting the punching bag, moving her feet, sweating, and hearing the sharp commands of her coach, a routine that had become her life. But that day felt different. She had just lost an important fight. It wasn't just a loss. Her opponent had left her face bruised, blood trickling from her temple, and pain radiating through her bones. But physical pain wasn't the most excruciating part. What hurt most was the emptiness. She stared at herself in the mirror of the locker room, her face swollen, but her soul was in far worse shape. "Why am I even doing this?" she thought as she wiped the blood from her face with an old towel. "Am I just a human trained to be hurt and to hurt others?" In the silence, she heard a soft voice from outside the room. It wasn't her coach shouting. It wasn't the pounding of music. It was recitation, a rhythm. Words she didn't understand, but somehow felt oddly familiar. She followed the sound. At the end of the hallway in a small room sat a tall man with a calm face, reading the Quran after his workout. His name was MJ. MJ wasn't just any coach. He was a former professional athlete who had switched paths and now spent his time training kids from the streets. Many said he was odd because he always seemed so calm, unemotional, and yet had a tough love approach that was full of care. "You just fought, didn't you?" MJ asked, looking at Amber, still a mess after the fight. Amber nodded. "I lost, but I'm not surprised. Maybe it's time I just quit." MJ smiled faintly. "Sometimes God lets us lose, so we can hear the voice we've been blocking out for so long." Amber chuckled bitterly. "God? It feels like God's given up on me a long time ago, coach." MJ paused, then spoke softly. "God never abandons anyone, but often it's us who forget he's always been there." Those words cut deeper than any punch her opponent had landed on her that day. In the following days, Amber found herself approaching MJ not just for training, but for conversation. About life, about the scars of her childhood, about the loss, the emptiness. Slowly, MJ began introducing her to Islam, not by force but by example. MJ continued to train her, but also to show her another side of the world she had never known. He invited her to join him for late-night tahajjud prayers. Not because she had to, but to experience the stillness, the peace it brought. And one night, in the deep silence, when everyone else was asleep, Amber found herself alone in the corner of her apartment. Her body ached from the physical training, but her soul felt restless. She didn't know how to pray the right way, but for the first time in her life, she spoke to God. In a soft voice, she said, "If you're real, show me the way home." And that night, the silence felt different, not empty, but warm. That day, the sky was clear, but Amber's heart was pounding like a storm. Her hands were cold, her footsteps were hesitant, but it felt like something beyond her control was pulling her forward. MJ was waiting outside the small mosque, the simple building at the corner of the city that had become her sanctuary from the chaos of her world. Amber stood frozen at the door. Am I really doing this? The thought echoed in her mind. It wasn't because she doubted her faith, but because she doubted herself. Was she worthy? After all the sins, the dark past, the wounds? MJ turned and smiled at her, his calm expression unwavering. If you're ready, come in. You don't have to be perfect to love God. You just need to be honest. Inside the mosque, everything was peaceful. A young imam greeted them as they entered, and with just a few witnesses, the small ceremony began. Amber stood there, not in makeup, not in MMA gear, just herself, stripped of all pretense, vulnerable. Then she spoke those two words, softly but firmly. Ashhadu alla ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. As soon as the words left her lips, it felt as if something inside Amber collapsed. All the burdens of years, the pain, the anger, the emptiness, all of it washed away with her tears. She cried, not because she was sad, but because, for the first time in her life, she felt home. They didn't say much, just shared a deep, knowing smile. Amber sat there in that mosque for a long time, staring at the light streaming through the windows. It was so still, yet her heart felt as if it were bursting with gratitude and emotion. The days after that felt like a new dawn. Amber began to learn simple prayers, memorize short surahs, and understand the meaning of the Quran. She woke up for Fajr, stood for prayer with a body still sore from training, but a heart lighter than ever before. She started wearing the hijab, not because she was told to, but because it was a symbol of love. The hijab wasn't a prison for her. It was a declaration that she now knew who she was and to whom she was returning. However, not everyone accepted the change. At the gym, there were whispers. Fellow fighters would ask, "Are you serious about this Islam thing? You're still going to fight, but with the hijab and prayers?" But Amber wasn't afraid. I didn't lose my strength when I became Muslim. I finally learned what true strength is. And when she stepped back into the ring for the first time after converting to Islam, with a body full of energy and a soul renewed, the crowd didn't just see a fighter. They saw a woman who had conquered her greatest opponent, herself. That evening, the sky was ablaze with the colors of the setting sun, yet the wind blew softly, cool and calm. Amber stood in front of an old cemetery, her hands holding a white flower and a small Quran she had recently begun to learn from. Her father's name was etched on the stone. It had been years since she last visited this place. Too many wounds, too many memories buried along with the earth. Amber sat slowly by the grave. She gently touched the ground, as if greeting her father who was now a stranger to her. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling, "if you were still alive, maybe you wouldn't understand why I am the way I am now. Or maybe you'd be proud. I don't know." Tears flowed, but not from sorrow. This time, it was from gratitude. "I became Muslim, Dad," she continued softly, "and I feel, for the first time in my life, I feel at peace. I'm not that angry little girl anymore. I'm not the girl who only knew how to fight just to survive." She opened the small Quran and began to read slowly, though she wasn't fluent yet. Ayah after ayah felt like a warm embrace from the heavens. She didn't know if her father could hear her, but she knew God could. Amber stood up, gazing at the sky now darkening above her. The wind softly caressed her hijab. She smiled, not the smile of a fighter seeking victory, but the smile of a daughter who had finally made peace with her past. On the way back, she looked at her reflection in the car window. She was no longer Amber Leibrock from before. Now she was a Muslima, a fighter, a daughter who no longer sought direction because she had found her way home. And in every prayer she offered, one prayer always flowed from her heart. "Oh Allah, send my greetings to Dad. Tell him I'm okay now."